It is the eve of Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. As evening casts its shadows over the earth, ushering in the most solemn day of the year, we join with our fellow men throughout the and in meditation. The Cantor, wearing a beautiful robe of white linen, walking solemnly through the aisles of the synagogue, chanting a verse from the book of Psalms. Light is sown for the righteous, and gladness for the upright in heart. Those following the Cantor carry white-mantled Torahs, sacred scrolls which contain the 5 books of Moses, written by hand, Torahs crowned with shining silver bells, tinkling as they're carried like voices in a heavenly symphony. The Cantor approaches the ark and ascends to the center pulpit. The rabbi and the elders group around him, holding the Torahs.
All right.
Howdy!
Howdy!
I don't know why, but howdy.
So I don't know if I want to say this is like another serious episode, but I think this is going to be more openly, just kind of like thoughtful.
Yes.
And instruction.
Just so we are clear, straight from the get-go, this is the Kol Nidre night with Moishe Oysher. And I'm going to say most of you are going to have no idea what any of that means.
To tell you the truth, I kind of hardly know what that means. This is the episode where Kevin proves
I'm more Jewish than you
are. He's more Jewish than I am,
and to be completely fair, I am not Jewish whatsoever.
No, I'm Jewish. It's just I come from a different kind of a background, like. And this is actually something I did want to talk about with this episode. Sorry if I didn't prime you for this, but like, you know, I will talk about like some of my experience and stuff like that.
We weren't even primed for this album, so
I mean,
off the cuff here.
I don't know. You've done a lot of. But anyway, this is also the episode where Kevin proves that he's an incredible researcher. But I was going to say the Jew thing, that it's just where Kevin proves that or at least that he knows more about Judaism than I do on some level.
Well, it's the scholar in me that's like, I need to know.
Mine's like kind of like cursory sort of knowledge that I got from being in like Hebrew school and stuff. Where it's just like you coming from an outside position having to research this while I was too busy like freaking out about like moving into my apartment, which I'm still doing.
Which I mean that's also on the same side of like, you have that obligation. And the interesting thing is that does tie to the idea of obligation that Kol Nidre brings up. I am on point with segues today.
Yeah.
So Kol Nidre, for the many of you who don't know what this is,
I didn't know,
is a tradition of Yom Kippur, the night before Yom Kippur, for the release of people from their vows from that day on till the next Yom Kippur. So it's a year of forgiveness for breaking oaths. That sounds kind of weird because it has a very specific tradition. Go ahead.
I was going to say, to clarify with what Yom Kippur is, Yom Kippur is like, there's, like when people refer to like Jewish high holidays, it's Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah being the New Year. Rosh Hashanah, like literally head of the New Year. I think Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, I sorry, I'm just trying to break it down.
He's actually translating.
But how much Hebrew do I know? But it's basically like that's the beginning of the Jewish New Year and the starting over of the Jewish calendar. And before that is Yom Kippur, and Yom Kippur, it's not only like the really like serious holiday. Like most Jewish holidays are like people try to kill us, and then I don't know, we have a party because we're not dead.
Exactly.
Yom Kippur is one of the ones that has a more explicit religious function. The idea being that you fast, and then during the fasting process, you sort of like ask God to be absolved of your sins, and you do that by not eating and like praying for a whole day, doing a lot of standing, doing a lot of sitting, wearing white is an important part of it.
And this all ties into that as well, because this is about
Yeah.
forgiveness of sins and breaking of vows, because it has a history of relating to kind of essentially like forced oaths, which is why there's an idea of that there is a whole process of breaking an oath. And one thing, and I'll just say it right now just to kind of bring up the thought process on it, this sounds to me like one of those things that kind of led to the stereotype that Jews are untrustworthy and greedy and all this kind of stuff. Like that you could get out of a business
more
deal.
research,
because there were actual sects of the Jewish faith that didn't agree with the process of the Kol Nidre. They had to be explained in royal courts. I think it was like in the 13th century. It was explained to the king and queen of France. There's just something to all of this that just, as an outsider, it can be difficult to understand. Just to go back to the high holidays, my favorite one is Sukkot.
So Sukkot? Oh yeah, that's right around that same time period too. Because that's one of the ones where I think it also has a more explicit religious function, but that one tends to be a bit more fun. And you build the tent with the palm fronds and the... Again,
proving my Jewish nature that I actually have a favorite high holiday.
Yeah, there's a favorite high holiday. Yeah, you didn't have to fucking participate in it. No, but I like Sukkot. I like Rosh Hashanah too. I mean, Yom Kippur was always just like, well, I guess we're doing this. And then there's this whole thing where, one of the... I don't know if this is like exactly something that has to happen. One of sort of I'm going to say tradition. I don't know. I really don't know if this is like actually earnestly a part of it. It was just part of sort of the synagogue I was involved in. Is that you literally make your sin, like your sin into like pieces of bread, and then you throw it into water. So like literally you're like casting away your sins and stuff like that.
Interesting.
That was something that I definitely, and because where I live in Mission Viejo is actually really close to an artificial body of water, we would walk from the synagogue to Lake Mission Viejo because it was within kind of a walking distance. But
the convenience of Orange County.
The convenience of Orange County. But yeah, that's a part of it too, but I don't know if that's just a really specific tradition.
We'll add that down here because I haven't heard that much about that before. But we can just see if there's any kind of process that's been used.
It could just be more of a Hasidic European thing, and that was the synagogue I was going to at the time. I'm a Middle Eastern Jew, but...
And now, amidst a hushed, breathless silence, the chanting of Kol Nidre. This prayer has as its theme the sincere longing for a clear conscience, the release from the feeling of guilt, and the desire to be absolved from vows made under duress or in haste.
Kol Nidre ve'asurei
But it's so fascinating that and it makes sense that the Kol Nidre would be attached to Yom Kippur because I guess specifically explain the oaths thing.
Okay,
what it was.
So Kol Nidre is not actually a prayer. It precedes the praying of Yom Kippur because it is actually a legal release. It is not done in Hebrew. It is done in traditional Aramaic, which is kind of like a preceding language. It's part of the.
I was trying to do some research on this. It's
more like it's a culturally like localized language, which is why like it ties more to a particular area, and that's that during the about 1,500 years ago or so, there were a lot of Jews in the Middle East that were forced to convert to Christianity or Islam, and the Kol Nidre supposedly. It was meant to release them from their conversion so they continue to practice Judaism and pray on for Yom Kippur and the High Holy Days. So that's the basis of this, that it was a way to get around these forced conversions and they wouldn't feel like sinners for promising to be Christians and then turning around and being a Jew. And, at the same time, it's that idea of, okay, I made this oath, even if it was a forced oath, breaking it would be, a sin to God. So we are having, and originally it was either 3 Jewish laymen who had to hear it at a tribunal, or it had to be a rabbi of a certain level of repute who would absolve you. And then that just got tied into this whole thing of just whoever shows up, we will do the Aramaic announcement that you are now legally absolved from your oath. They do it, I think 3 times in total, 2 at the beginning and then 1 at the end, so that anybody who is coming, even if they're late, as long as you're in earshot, basically, you are hearing it and you are therefore absolved. It's very complex. It has a lot to do with the tradition, and I think over time, like it's dealt with a lot of issues. And this one in particular was done. I couldn't find a year on this album in particular. They do reference the Holocaust.
I think this is most likely like mid to early 50s.
Okay.
Could be. I mean, just from the way it's sort of organized and how the production of it looks, it's very basic. There's not a lot of color going on. It's very simple looking kind of record.
It's also a very serious record.
It's also a very serious record too.
And I didn't want to go into it too much because I was doing a little bit of research on Moishe Oysher, the cantor for the record. He died in 1958, so it has to be really close to when the Holocaust actually happened.
I guess it could have been. This could even be the late 40s.
Exactly, it's right in that time period.
Well, because they mentioned Dachau, and all of that, and I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting to learn about because this was a thing that we did, grow up knowing about. Mostly, I know about it in Spain, and I imagine this probably had a lot of presence in Spain,
Yes.
dealing with the Inquisition and Jews sort of having to be like, "Yep, totally Catholic, not into the Jewish thing anymore. Love Jesus. We're really good about it. We're really good about it. Please don't torture me."
Exactly.
Like that's what it was. But it's just like I think it was kind of. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I would get why it would be important for this kind of thing to have a presence. Gonna get that fly eventually. Just because, I mean, they're being forced, under penalty of death or torture to sort of besmirch their own faith. And, and it's one of those things where, like, I don't know why I'm sure I could find a better Jewish example, but the idea being that like there's this thing that happened in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
It was I forget it was like a certain test to see whether or not someone was a Christian, and I don't know if this is apocryphal. Because there's definitely a movie about it called Silence, but the idea being that they would have like an image of like Christ or the Virgin Mary or something like that, and they would ask people to either like spit on it or step on it to sort of like prove that they weren't. There were. Again, that's one of those things where it's like, I don't know how necessarily realistic that is, but the idea being that, like, if you did something like that, like as a Jewish person, just being like, nope, I'll totally be like eating pork and be a Christian and, all the things. The idea that there'd be a specific thing forgiving you for that, saying it's just like we release you of those vows that you've made to other people in order to preserve your life, in order to preserve, in order to preserve yourself. As a Jewish person, like we're okay.
Exactly, and it kind of ties into how, and you can probably speak to a little bit more about this. Yeah. A lot of Jewish tradition is about survival of the tribe.
Yeah,
like, you have these rules that are made.
Yeah.
Well, it's like you look at like not eating pork or not eating shellfish. It's a lot of that ties to at the time. Like shellfish had a very
reputation and still does.
Yeah. Well, it's like especially there are certain times of the year where you can't eat it because of a mating season where they release dangerous toxins, and not understanding that, you just know that all of a sudden, this seemed fine at one time and all of a sudden now it's not. So it's like, okay, screw it. We aren't gonna bother with it. We can't risk it. So you're gonna hold off for a minute there. So it's about survival, and a lot of outsiders wouldn't understand that. And that's, again, where I think a lot of stereotyping and these kinds of prejudices come from, is you could see something like this, and as an outsider, you have a completely different understanding of what that means than somebody who is part of the tribe and knows, like, this comes from hundreds of years of persecution and not being allowed to practice your faith. But just as an outsider, you'd be like, oh, that means you could make a business deal and just like say, fuck off, I'm not going to pay you the money. I've already got my side of it.
Right.
And it's like, that's the problem with it. Right. And so we can...
people start to use that as just being like, oh, that's why we can't, trust those guys over there. And it's just like...
Exactly. And I think there are a lot of things, and we've avoided the subject of Israel before, and we can stay away from it continue forward.
But I mean, in this context, it's probably important to discuss because we're talking about... I mean, this is right at the time period where, I mean, I think a lot of the formation of Israel had everything to do with the fact that you had Jews just coming fresh and hot out of the Holocaust.
Yeah,
and the whole situation is handled pretty horribly by the British government. And
handled pretty horribly by all parties involved.
I know, but the British government was in control of the territory of Palestine.
Very true.
And stuff like that. That was, but yes, I'm probably getting a lot of details wrong there. I'm sorry, but it's just, it was grossly mishandled, like, from the start. I won't say much to the effect of how it is now, just for the sake of...
For the history of it.
For the history of it. But this is a time where people were really sort of latching onto that because they're like, you see that thing that happened over there, this is proof that we need a land that we can gather together and be Jews and like a place.
And that's why there's an actual print of the Kol Nidre announcement.
Was this performed in Israel, or are they just sort of, are they talking about the idea of Israel? Maybe we should look
Let me take a look, because it's really hard to find a track of this or information about this specific record, because Kol Nidre refers to the general event. Moishe Oysher, which I'll go into a little bit more after the break, is a particular cantor, but he's known for other things besides this. So it's hard to find specific information about this. And I will do a little bit and see if we can come back with anything on this. So we will be right back. And enjoy whatever we're about to listen to, because it is very serious.
And all the congregation of Israel shall be forgiven, together with the stranger who dwells among them. For the people have all transgressed unknowingly. Pardon, O Lord, the iniquities of our people, according to thy great mercy.
We're back.
Hello, everybody, again.
Yes.
Just so you know, we tried doing some really quick research, and this is not the album for that. So
Other than
look
the fact
for
that
it.
it's like kind of just available, you can buy it in like compilations.
Yeah.
compilations.
The record label, it sounds like, continually re-releases a lot of their content.
Either that, or it's one of those things where like maybe just like a small like Jewish label kind of thing. It like releases maybe like some religious music, might have gotten a hold of this or something like that. I don't know exactly, but like it's definitely one of those things where it's like you can find it. Just we can't find information about it.
Yeah, we'll
other than the fact that it exists.
What we'll do is we'll do more research on this and see if we can find some more information, and we'll put it in post at the bottom like we like to do. But that actually does bring up a really good point. I wasn't really sure what I was going to address in this second half, but that gave me a little bit of a thought of the why of putting this onto a record. Like, this is an interesting process. This is a tradition that's been around, and it's redone every year. There's also a similar prayer that's done for Rosh Hashanah that's completely separate from the Kol Nidre. It's actually done in Hebrew, but it essentially absolves oaths the exact same way. But what would the purpose be of taking this and recording it? Was it just because the technology was now available to do this, and it didn't have to be just vocal tradition?
I think it just goes in line with like the same reasons that like half of the stuff we have is like recorded. It's just it was the home media version of like this. Moishe Oysher was a really popular cantor. Like listening to it's like listening to a really incredible piece of classical music in a lot of different ways. So.
Like, and just to address really quickly, Moishe Oysher is considered one of the most famous cantors of all time. He was born in 1906 and died in 1958. He was actually an actor in multiple films as well, very well known in the Yiddish community in the U.S. Born in Romania and came over when he was young. So, and that in its time period was also remarkable that somebody from Romania could make it over here and do a lot of good. Sixth or seventh generation Cantor, but just he is really well known, which is why he's involved in the project. But just it's interesting that it's one of those things that's just it's recorded. It's a recording of this, and it's beyond just the idea that it's a vocal tradition at this point.
That's true. Well, I mean, I think having because narration by Barry Gray, I think the Barry Gray narration kind of opens us up to people who are not Jewish. Because I don't think the family that had this record was Jewish. This is one that I got at this. There's a dying mall in kind of like Mission Bay, the Laguna Hills Mall. It's been on a really like horrible like death,
it's been in its death throes for years.
It's been in its death throes for years. And I think they're going to knock it down and replace it with something actually really soon. I saw the plans for it. I don't know if that's okay for me to mention, but it was just his cursory. I wasn't looking for it. I just saw him.
Orange County breaking news.
but I think people know it's going to get knocked down. I think people know it's going to be replaced by something, or maybe they don't give a shit. And I think the only thing is that like I saw like the graphics for for the plans or something like that.
Okay, that makes sense.
But and not like a detailed layout, just like here's what it's going to look like.
You weren't on the planning committee.
I was on the anyway, but I found this there. It's like this bookstore that's just like used books and stuff like that. They just had a shitload of records like all the way in the back. And I also bought a first edition copy of In Cold Blood there, which is a good book that I still need to finish. But that's where I found this, and this was a family that had just like I'm pretty sure it was the same collection. A lot of Mormon Tabernacle Choir, a lot of sort of religious music, and I think that this had some appeal to people who were just like listening to religious music, who like this kind of like.
Was it more for like a collector's sense of being like, oh, this is like a religious piece,
like a religious like I have a strange feeling. So I think there might be some appeal to that because it's clearly designed so someone like you can understand it a little bit better. But they also don't really explicitly go into what the Kol Nidre is, other than saying that, like, this is the prayer, this is the absolution of sins, and stuff like that.
And bringing up, as we mentioned before, about specific events and why why this is important to Dachau and everything.
Right.
And, returning to Israel, bringing up a lot of, at the time, was very contemporary.
Yeah.
So it holds its place in what was going on in what was probably the early 1950s. Yeah. It's just interesting that it exists.
Yeah.
And it's worth listening to if you have an interest in Jewish culture and Jewish history.
Also it's really cool sounding. Here's the thing. Cantors are not like a ubiquitous part of like Jewish culture, Jewish faith.
Mm-hmm.
The synagogue I went to for like actually I'd say for the majority of my life. There were Chabadniks who were they're like a sect of like Orthodox like Ashkenazi, which is European Judaism. And within that, like, because Ashkenazi refers to the sort of like general kind of European thing, and then the Hasids are like the super more religious, more spiritual kinds, and then the Chabadniks are Hasids that followed this guy named Chabad Lubavitch. There's some contention about Chabad Lubavitch in a lot of the Jewish communities, but the Chabadniks, their whole thing is they just build centers everywhere, and they just want people to be more Jewish, and they also want people to know about Chabad Lubavitch and how great he was.
And I have seen those Chabad centers around.
Yeah. No, you see them kind of everywhere. Not every like Orthodox Jew with the hat and the wearing the suit everywhere is a Chabadnik, but they're the ones that are like going out there and really trying to reach out to the community, whereas a lot of Orthodox Jews may not necessarily tend to do that, tend to be a bit more insular, tight-knit. But
And now as the ark is opened once more, we hear the eternal cry of an eternal people. A wail heard many times throughout the ages. Through many centuries of religious persecution and intolerance. The voice of the Cantor praying for the people. Shema Kolenu, hear our voice, O Lord.
But Cantor's, I've always been curious because because there's Reform, Orthodox, and Conservative are sort of the basic layouts. Reform being a movement that started way back, that was just kind of like, let's dial the shit way back. Conservative being a sort of more recent movement that was sort of like, let's at least find a happy middle ground, and Orthodox being like, we're Jewish, this is how we're doing it.
Men and women sit on different sides of the room.
Men and women sit on different sides of the room kind of thing.
There's a curtain.
Or they sit upstairs or something like that.
Okay, just to explain, the reason I know so much about Jewish culture and everything...
Have you been to the synagogue a few times?
I worked in a place called Laguna Woods Village, formerly Leisure World.
Oh, yeah.
In this area. Huge Jewish population, and they had all the different groups of the synagogues.
Yeah.
And so we had...
You had the Reform, the Conservative, and the Orthodox.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's how I know about Sukkot and about the different high holidays.
So you just kind of had to be involved in the course of your gerontology work.
And that was even before that. That was like just working and
also, he's a gerontologist. We should point that out.
Hi, everybody.
But keep going.
And which is kind of an interesting thing that I do study this about old records because it has to do with aging and everything. That's a long discussion. We'll probably do a whole video about that sometime.
That'd be great.
But that's where my basis in this comes from. And a lot of that is piecemeal about Jewish culture. And, I know certain things, and that's why it sounds like I talk a little bit more about specific subjects and knowing more. It's just because I picked up a lot over that time, and then doing the research about this, those pieces then come back into play and tie to the rest of this. One thing that was referenced earlier is talking about the different groups with the synagogues. And I had mentioned that not everybody accepted the Kol Nidre.
Yeah.
There's a group called, I think, was it Karaites?
Yeah.
Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, I think that's right. If it's wrong, let us know, but yeah.
And we'll probably amend this down here as well, but it seems like the Karaites were like the Lutherans to the Orthodox synagogue, that they were the ones who said, okay, this shit is not acceptable, and this is why.
Yeah.
And this is one of those things of like, that you can absolve somebody of oaths. And while there were rules associated with this, that, if somebody made an oath with the intention of breaking it when Kol Nidre rolled around, like, obviously that person is not going to be absolved of their oath. But that's getting into the head of somebody, and in that same way of like the Catholic Church, like, oh, we know the truth and we can sell forgiveness. The idea that the governing body, or the religious body that controls all that, the cantors and the
Well, I don't know if the cantors really control that much, but sorry.
But I feel like they're in a sense, even though they are just the cantors, they are a part of what is the governing body of the temple,
of the synagogue or the temple.
and you have the rabbis. But it's that same thing that there's a specific group of people who are in control, and they make the rules, and they allow people to absolve themselves of this, and that's why Kol Nidre is special in that it is an actual legally binding or legal release. And that's different from just saying like, oh, we have prayed and you no longer have to worry about this. It's in a religious sense. This is a specifically legal sense. And a group like the Karaites didn't accept it.
Yeah.
And we have this that happens over time. We have sects that break down and groups that identify with a specific leader and they go off and do their own thing. And exactly. Yeah. So it's interesting to see how this plays into that and how this ties back to a tradition that is 1,000 years old, which in terms of Jewish faith is actually a very recent one. And, you have like your Orthodox Jews who aren't allowed to turn on the lights, which I had to do every weekend for a number of years.
I didn't have to do it.
Going in and plugging, literally to the point where you had to go, you had to turn the lights on in the room, you had to plug in their coffee machine, you had to set things up for them.
Yeah, even hyper-religious Christians, like, I guess maybe some do, but don't keep, like, the Sabbath in that same way.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting, because that used to be a thing where, like, everything would close down on a Sunday, because it's just like, are you doing anything on a Sunday?
And it's funny that you see a lot of that come back in a lot of Asian groups, that their tie to Christianity has led them to start observing the Sabbath.
Okay, that's interesting. Sorry, especially just moving back into LA. Like I started going to parts of LA that are like mostly Jewish, and it's just like stuff will be closed down Friday nights after sundown, and then all of Saturday.
Exactly,
pretty much, or until sundown. But I'm pretty sure most of those places, it's like we're not going to open up at like at 9 p.m. on
if you want to
Saturday night.
If you want to see Asian places closed on a Sunday, go to like Westminster.
It's
like not too far from it's not too far from where we are here. You can be quiet for a couple more minutes. But yeah, same concept. You have people observing tradition of faith, and in this, it's this legal release. I keep saying that a lot, but I mean, there's really no other way to describe it. This is a legal doctrine, basically. But just the idea of tradition having an effect on the way you observe your daily life, and that's a very broad scope, going from a very specific album.
Yeah.
So, we're trying to tie in a bunch of things here together.
Yeah. It's all pretty complicated. I don't know.
I wish we knew a little bit more about Islamic faith to see how that would tie into, like, finding more comparison.
Maybe that's something we'll have to dig for ourselves to see if there's any... and I know... I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if we can find any recordings.
Yeah, I think that'd be intensely interesting.
I'd love to have some prayers on record and stuff like that. That'd be cool.
Just because we have talked a lot about Jewish history and we've talked about Jews before, doesn't mean we don't want to learn more.
I hate to be the guy to point it out, but I think it's just that like Jews just like to make a lot of stuff and just like keep putting it out there. And so do Christians too, but there's I don't know. It's just
that's just. I think that's to be fair. I think in general that's just the nature of supporting one's faith and one's organization.
That's true, but it's just like Jews always kind of made like the idea of Jewish humor like was never just we're just selling this to Jews. They try to make it accessible to everybody, kind of thing. So I think it's really like. It's hard to become Jewish. It's a really difficult religion to convert into. But we're interested in everyone knowing what we're doing. So
we just want your respect.
We just want your respect. We need you to know.
It's kind of like how, and to pull it away from the religious side of it, like there are like national groups. Like you have like the Polish centers where people of Polish descent go. You have your Italian families. You have your Daughters of the Mayflower, and like all of these groups. I actually don't want to talk too much about the Mayflower groups because they're kind of weirdly racist. But all these groups are self-insulating, but at the same time they find ways to reach out, and you get things like this out of that.
Yeah. I guess that's it for today. It's really fucking hot, and we're in a hot garage. We're in a set.
This
isn't a hot garage.
The sun is beating through the set. because we set up outside. This is falling apart.
It's so hot.
We're
so hot.
And we're probably going to be gleaming on camera because we are sweating in here now.
Profusely.
So with that, we will be seeing you again next week. Dan,
Kevin?
see you on the flip side.
This is too much. We gotta get away. Okay, now let's take all
Yes,
these
seriously.
off here.
And that's the end of the episode.
Thank you very much for sticking around and watching the whole thing.
Like, subscribe, comment, click down below the thingy,
Exactly. And then click the other thing for the other thingy.
and then watch our other videos, and then watch the next video, and watch the last video. So watch our things.
We promise they're very similar but very enjoyable.
Have a good one. Bye.